Chapter 8. Black Wisdom. By thought, a crawling ruin, by life, a leaping mire, by a broken heart in the breast of the world, and at the end of the world's desire. Chesterton. The terrible spectacle drove for the instant all thought of rebellion from my mind. My very blood froze in my veins, and I stood motionless. I heard Hassim laugh grimly behind me. The eyes in the cadaverous face blazed fiendishly at me, and I blanched from the concentrated satanic fury in them. Then the horror laughed sibilantly. "I do you a great honor, Mr. Costigan. Among a very few, even of my own servants, you may say that you saw my face and lived. I think you will be more useful to me living than dead." I was silent, completely unnerved. It was difficult to believe that this man lived, for his appearance certainly belied the thought. He seemed horribly like a mummy, yet his lips moved when he spoke, and his eyes flamed with hideous life. "You will do as I say," he said abruptly, and his voice had taken on a note of command. "You doubtless know, or know of, Sir Haldred Frenton." Yes. Every man of culture in Europe and America was familiar with the travel books of Sir Haldred Frenton, author and soldier of fortune. "You will go to Sir Haldred's estate tonight." Yes. "And kill him." I staggered, literally. This order was incredible, unspeakable. I had sunk low enough to smuggle opium, but to deliberately murder a man I had never seen, a man noted for his kindly deeds. That was too monstrous even to contemplate. "You do not refuse." The tone was as loathly and as mocking as the hiss of a serpent. "Refuse?" I screamed, finding my voice at last. "Refuse? You incarnate devil! Of course I refuse. You—" Something in the cold assurance of his manner halted me, froze me into apprehensive silence. "You fool," he said calmly. "I broke the hashish chains. Do you know how? 4 minutes from now, you will know, and curse the day you were born. Have you not thought it strange, the swiftness of brain, the resilience of body, the brain that should be rusty and slow, the body that should be weak and sluggish from years of abuse? That blow that felled John Gordon, have you not wondered at its might, the ease with which you mastered Major Morley's records? Have you not wondered at that? You fool, you were bound to me by chains of steel and blood and fire. I have kept you alive and sane, I alone. Each day, the life-saving elixir has been given you in your wine. You could not live and keep your reason without it, and I, and only I, know its secret." He glanced at a queer timepiece which stood on a table at his elbow. "This time, I had Jan Chateau leave the elixir out. I anticipated rebellion. The time is near. Ha! It strikes." Something else he said, but I did not hear. I did not see, nor did I feel, in the human senses of the word. I was writhing at his feet, screaming and gibbering in the flames of such hells as men have never dreamed of. I knew now. He had simply given me a dope so much stronger that it drowned the hashish. My unnatural ability was explainable now. I had simply been acting under the stimulus of something which combined all the hells in its makeup, which stimulated, something like heroin, but whose effect was unnoticed by the victim. What it was, I had no idea, nor did I believe anyone knew save that hellish being who stood watching me with grim amusement. But it had held my brain together, instilling into my system a need for it, and now my frightful craving tore my soul asunder. Never, in my moments of worst shell shock or my moments of hashish craving, have I ever experienced anything like that. I burned with the heat of 1,000 hells and froze with an iciness that was colder than any ice 100 times. I swept down to the deepest pits of torture and up to the highest crags of torment. 1,000,000 yelling devils hemmed me in, shrieking and stabbing. Bone by bone, vein by vein, cell by cell, I felt my body disintegrate and fly into bloody atoms all over the universe. And each separate cell was an entire system of quivering, screaming nerves, and they gathered from far voids and reunited with a greater torment. Through the fiery bloody mists, I heard my own voice screaming, a monotonous yammering. Then, with distended eyes, I saw a golden goblet, held by a claw-like hand, swim into view, a goblet filled with an amber liquid. With a bestial screech, I seized it with both hands, being dimly aware that the metal stem gave beneath my fingers, and brought the brim to my lips. I drank in frenzied haste, the liquid slopping down onto my breast. Chapter 9. Cathulos of Egypt. Night shall be thrice night over you, and heaven an iron cope. Chesterton. The skull-faced one stood watching me critically as I sat panting on a couch, completely exhausted. He held in his hand the goblet and surveyed the golden stem, which was crushed out of all shape. This my maniac fingers had done in the instant of drinking. Superhuman strength, even for a man in your condition, he said with a sort of creaky pedantry. I doubt even if Hassim here could equal it. Are you ready for your instructions now? I nodded, wordless. Already the hellish strength of the elixir was flowing through my veins, renewing my burnt-out force. I wondered how long a man could live as I lived, being constantly burned out and artificially rebuilt. You will be given a disguise and will go alone to the Frenton estate. No one suspects any design against Sir Haldred, and your entrance into the estate and the house itself should be a matter of comparative ease. You will not don the disguise, which will be of unique nature, until you are ready to enter the estate. You will then proceed to Sir Haldred's room and kill him, breaking his neck with your bare hands. This is essential. The voice droned on, giving the ghastly orders in a frightfully casual and matter-of-fact way. The cold sweat beaded my brow. You will then leave the estate, taking care to leave the imprint of your hand somewhere plainly visible, and the automobile, which will be waiting for you at some safe place nearby, will bring you back here, you having first removed the disguise. I have, in case of complications, any amount of men who will swear that you spent the entire night in the Temple of Dreams and never left it, but here must be no detection. Go warily and perform your task surely, for you know the alternative. I did not return to the opium house, but was taken through winding corridors, hung with heavy tapestries, to a small room containing only an oriental couch. Hassim gave me to understand that I was to remain here until after nightfall, and then left me. The door was closed, but I made no effort to discover if it was locked. The skull-faced master held me with stronger shackles than locks and bolts. Seated upon the couch in the bizarre setting of a chamber which might have been a room in an Indian zenana, I faced fact squarely and fought out my battle. There was still in me some trace of manhood left, more than the fiend had reckoned, and added to this were black despair and desperation. I chose and determined on my only course. Suddenly, the door opened softly. Some intuition told me whom to expect, nor was I disappointed. Zuleika stood, a glorious vision before me, a vision which mocked me, made blacker my despair, and yet thrilled me with wild yearning and reasonless joy. She bore a tray of food, which she set beside me, and then seated herself on the couch, her large eyes fixed upon my face. A flower in a serpent den she was, and the beauty of her took hold of my heart. "Stephen," she whispered, and I thrilled as she spoke my name for the first time. Her luminous eyes suddenly shone with tears, and she laid her little hand on my arm. I seized it in both my rough hands. "They have set you a task which you fear and hate," she faltered. I almost laughed. "But I'll fool them yet. Zuleika, tell me, what is the meaning of all this?" She glanced fearfully around her. "I do not know all," she hesitated. "Your plight is all my fault, but I hoped. Stephen, I have watched you every time you came to Yan Chateau's for months. You did not see me, but I saw you, and I saw in you not the broken sot your rags proclaimed, but a wounded soul, a soul bruised terribly on the ramparts of life, and from my heart I pitied you. Then, when Hassim abused you that day," again tears started into her eyes, "I could not bear it, and I knew how you suffered for want of hashish, so I paid Yan Chateau, and going to the master, oh, you will hate me for this," she sobbed. No, never. "I told him that you were a man who might be of use to him, and begged him to have Yan Chateau supply you with what you needed. He had already noticed you, for his is the eye of the slaver, and all the world is his slave market. So he bade Yan Chateau to do as I asked, and now, better if you had remained as you were, my friend." No, I exclaimed. "I have known a few days of regeneration, even if it was false. I have stood before you as a man, and that is worth all else." And all that I felt for her must have looked forth from my eyes, for she dropped hers and flushed. Ask me not how love comes to a man, but I knew that I loved Zuleika, had loved this mysterious Oriental girl, since first I saw her, and somehow I felt that she, in a measure, returned my affection. This realization made blacker and more barren the road I had chosen. Yet, for pure love must ever strengthen a man, it nerved me to what I must do. "Zuleika," I said, speaking hurriedly, "time flies, and there are things I must learn. Tell me, who are you, and why do you remain in this den of Hades?" "I am Zuleika, that is all I know. I am Circassian by blood and birth. When I was very little, I was captured in a Turkish raid, and raised in a Istanbul harem. While I was yet too young to marry, my master gave me as a present to him." "And who is he, this skull-faced man?" "He is Cathulas of Egypt. That is all I know. My master." "An Egyptian? Then what is he doing in London? Why all this mystery?" She intertwined her fingers nervously. "Stephen, please speak lower, Always there is someone listening everywhere. I do not know who the master is, or why he is here, or why he does these things. I swear by Allah, if I knew, I would tell you. Sometimes disguised-looking men come here to the room where the master receives them, not the room where you saw him, and he makes me dance before them and always flirt with them a little, and always I must repeat exactly what they say to me. That is what I must always do, in Turkey, in the Barbary States, in Egypt, in France, and in England. The master taught me French and English, and educated me in many ways himself. He is the greatest sorcerer in all the world, and knows all ancient magic and everything. Zuleika, I said, my race is soon run, but let me get you out of this. Come with me, and I swear I'll get you away from this fiend. She shuddered and hid her face. No, I cannot. Zuleika, I asked gently, what hold has he over you, child? Dope also? No, she whimpered. I do not know, but I cannot. I never can escape him. I sat, baffled for a few moments. Then I asked, Zuleika, where are we right now? This building is a deserted storehouse back of the Temple of Silence. I thought so. What is in the chests in the tunnel? I do not know. Then suddenly she began weeping softly. You too, a slave like me, you who are so strong and kind. Oh, Stephen, I cannot bear it. I smiled. Lean closer, Zuleika, and I will tell you how I am going to fool this Cthulhus. She glanced apprehensively at the door. You must speak low. I will lie low in your arms, and while you pretend to caress me, whisper your words to me. She glided into my embrace, and there, on the dragon-worked couch in that house of horror, I first knew the glory of Zuleika's slender form nestling in my arms, of Zuleika's soft cheek pressing my breast. The fragrance of her was in my nostrils, her hair in my eyes, and my senses reeled. Then, with my lips hidden by her silky hair, I whispered swiftly, I'm going first to warn Sir Haldred Frenton, then to find John Gordon and tell him of this den. I will lead the police here, and you must watch closely and be ready to hide from him until I can break through and kill or capture him. Then you will be free. But you, she gasped, paling. You must have the elixir, and only he. I have a way of outdoing him, child, I answered. She went pitifully white, and her woman's intuition sprang at the right conclusion. You are going to kill yourself. And much as it hurt me to see her emotion, I yet felt a torturing thrill that she should feel so on my account. Her arms tightened about my neck. Don't, Stephen, she begged. It is better to live, even... No, not at that price. Better to go out clean while I have the manhood left. She stared at me wildly for an instant. Then, pressing her red lips suddenly to mine, she sprang up and fled from the room. Strange, strange are the ways of love. Two stranded ships on the shores of life, we had drifted inevitably together, and though no word of love had passed between us, we knew each other's heart, through grime and rags, and through accoutrements of the slave, we knew each other's heart, and from the first loved as naturally and as purely as it was intended from the beginning of time. The beginning of life, now, and the end for me, for as soon as I had completed my task, ere I felt again the torments of my curse, love and life and beauty and torture should be blotted out together in the stark finality of a pistol ball scattering my rotting brain. Better a clean death than... The door opened again, and Yusuf Ali entered. "The hour arrives for departure," he said briefly. "Rise and follow." I had no idea, of course, as to the time. No window opened from the room I occupied. I had seen no outer window whatever. The rooms were lighted by tapers in censers swinging from the ceiling. As I rose, the slim young Moor slanted a sinister glance in my direction. "This lies between you and me," he said sibilantly. "Servants of the same master, we, but this concerns ourselves alone. Keep your distance from Zuleika. The master has promised her to me in the days of the Empire." His eyes narrowed to slits as I looked into the frowning, handsome face of the Oriental, and such hate surged up in me as I have seldom known. My fingers involuntarily opened and closed, and the Moor, marking the action, stepped back, hand in his girdle. "Not now. There is work for us both. Later, perhaps." Then, in a sudden cold gust of hatred, "Swine, ape man, when the master is finished with you, I shall quench my dagger in your heart." I laughed grimly. "Make it soon, desert snake, or I'll crush your spine between my hands." Chapter 10. The Dark House. Against all man-made shackles and a man-made hell, alone at last, unaided, I rebel. Monday. I followed Yusuf Ali along the winding hallways, down the steps. Cathulos was not in the idol room, and along the tunnel, then through the rooms of the Temple of Dreams and out into the street, where the street lamps gleamed drearily through the fogs and a slight drizzle. Across the street stood an automobile, curtains closely drawn. "That is yours," said Hassim, who had joined us. "Saunter across natural-like. Don't act suspicious. The place may be watched. The driver knows what to do." Then he and Yusuf Ali drifted back into the bar, and I took a single step toward the curb. "Stephen!" A voice that made my heart leap spoke my name. A white hand beckoned from the shadows of a doorway. I stepped quickly there. "Zuleika!" "Shh!" She clutched my arm, slipping something into my hand. I made out vaguely a small flask of gold. "Hide this, quick!" came her urgent whisper. "Don't come back, but go away and hide. This is full of elixir. I will try to get you some more before that is all gone. You must find a way of communicating with me." "Yes, but how did you get this?" I asked amazedly. "I stole it from the master. Now please, I must go before he misses me." And she sprang back into the doorway and vanished. I stood undecided. I was sure that she had risked nothing less than her life in doing this, and I was torn by the fear of what Cathulos might do to her were the theft discovered. But to return to the house of mystery would certainly invite suspicion, and I might carry out my plan and strike back before the skull-faced one learned of his slave's duplicity. So I crossed the street to the waiting automobile. The driver was a Negro whom I had never seen before, a lanky man of medium height. I stared hard at him, wondering how much he had seen. He gave no evidence of having seen anything, and I decided that even if he had noticed me step back into the shadows, he could not have seen what passed there, nor have been able to recognize the girl. He merely nodded as I climbed into the back seat, and a moment later we were speeding away down the deserted and fog-haunted streets. A bundle beside me, I concluded to be the disguise mentioned by the Egyptian. To recapture the sensations I experienced as I rode through the rainy, misty night would be impossible. I felt as if I were already dead, and the bare and dreary streets about me were the roads of death over which my ghost had been doomed to roam forever. A torturing joy was in my heart, and bleak despair, the despair of a doomed man. Not that death itself was so repellent. A dope victim dies too many deaths to shrink from the last, but it was hard to go out just as love had entered my barren life, and I was still young. A sardonic smile crossed my lips. They were young too, the men who died beside me in no man's land. I drew back my sleeve and clenched my fist, tensing my muscles. There was no surplus of weight on my frame, and much of the firm flesh had wasted away, but the cords of the great biceps still stood out like knots of iron, seeming to indicate massive strength. But I knew my might was false, that in reality I was a broken hulk of a man, animated only by the artificial fire of the elixir, without which a frail girl might topple me over. The automobile came to a halt among some trees. We were on the outskirts of an exclusive suburb, and the hour was past midnight. Through the trees, I saw a large house looming darkly against the distant flares of nighttime London. "This is where I wait," said the Negro. "No one can see the automobile from the road or from the house." Holding a match so that its light could not be detected outside the car, I examined the disguise and was hard put to restrain an insane laugh. The disguise was the complete hide of a gorilla. Gathering the bundle under my arm, I trudged toward the wall which surrounded the Frenton estate. A few steps, and the trees where the Negro hid with the car merged into one dark mass. I did not believe he could see me, but for safety's sake I made, not for the high iron gate at the front, but for the wall at the side where there was no gate. No light showed in the house. Sir Haldred was a bachelor, and I was sure that the servants were all in bed long ago. I negotiated the wall with ease, and stole across the dark lawn to a side door, still carrying the grisly disguise under my arm. The door was locked, as I had anticipated, and I did not wish to arouse anyone until I was safely in the house, where the sound of voices would not carry to one who might have followed me. I took hold of the knob with both hands, and exerting slowly the inhuman strength that was mine, began to twist. The shaft turned in my hands, and the lock within shattered suddenly, with a noise that was like the crash of a cannon in the stillness. An instant more, and I was inside, and had closed the door behind me. I took a single stride in the darkness in the direction I believed the stair to be, then halted as a beam of light flashed into my face. At the side of the beam, I caught the glimmer of a pistol muzzle. Beyond, a lean, shadowy face floated. "Stand where you are, and put up your hands." I lifted my hands, allowing the bundle to slip to the floor. I had heard that voice only once, but I recognized it, knew instantly that the man who held that light was John Gordon. "How many are with you?" His voice was sharp, commanding. "I am alone," I answered. "Take me into a room where a light cannot be seen from the outside, and I'll tell you some things you want to know." He was silent then, bidding me take up the bundle I had dropped. He stepped to one side and motioned me to precede him into the next room. There, he directed me to a stairway, and at the top landing opened a door and switched on lights. I found myself in a room whose curtains were closely drawn. During this journey, Gordon's alertness had not relaxed, and now he stood, still covering me with his revolver. Clad in conventional garments, he stood revealed, a tall, leanly but powerfully built man, taller than I, but not so heavy, with steel grey eyes and clean-cut features. Something about the man attracted me, even as I noted a bruise on his jawbone where my fist had struck in our last meeting. "I cannot believe," he said crisply, "that this apparent clumsiness and lack of subtlety is real. Doubtless, you had your own reasons for wishing me to be in a secluded room at this time, but Sir Haldred is effectively protected even now. Stand still." Muzzle pressed against my chest, he ran his hand over my garments for concealed weapons, seeming slightly surprised when he found none. "Still," he muttered as if to himself, "a man who can burst an iron lock with his bare hands has scant need of weapons." "You are wasting valuable time," I said impatiently. "I was sent here tonight to kill Sir Haldred Frenton." "By whom?" The question was shot at me. "By the man who sometimes goes disguised as a leper." He nodded, a gleam in his scintillant eyes. My suspicions were correct, then. "Doubtless. Listen to me closely. Do you desire the death or arrest of that man?" Gordon laughed grimly. "To one who wears the mark of the scorpion on his hand, my answer would be superfluous." "Then follow my directions, and your wish shall be granted." His eyes narrowed suspiciously. "So that was the meaning of this open entry and non-resistance," he said slowly. "Does the dope which dilates your eyeballs so warp your mind that you think to lead me into ambush?" I pressed my hand against my temples. Time was racing, and every moment was precious. How could I convince this man of my honesty? "Listen, my name is Stephen Costigan of America. I was a frequenter of Yun Chatou's dive, and a hashish addict, as you have guessed, but just now a slave of stronger dope. By virtue of this slavery, the man you know as a false leper, whom Yun Chatou and his friends call Master, gained dominance over me and sent me here to murder Sir Haldred. Why, God only knows, but I've gained a space of respite by coming into possession of some of this dope, which I must have in order to live. And I fear and hate this Master. Listen to me, and I swear, by all things holy and unholy, that before the sun rises, the false leper shall be in your power." I could tell that Gordon was impressed in spite of himself. "Speak fast," he rapped. Still, I could sense his disbelief, and a wave of futility swept over me. "If you will not act with me," I said, "let me go, and somehow I'll find a way to get to the Master and kill him. My time is short, my hours are numbered, and my vengeance is yet to be realized." "Let me hear your plan, and talk fast," Gordon answered. "It is simple enough. I will return to the Master's lair and tell him I have accomplished that which he sent me to do. You must follow closely with your men, and while I engage the Master in conversation, surround the house. Then, at the signal, break in and kill or seize him." Gordon frowned. "Where is this house?" "The warehouse back of Yun Chatou's has been converted into a veritable Oriental palace." "The warehouse!" he exclaimed. "How can that be? I had thought of that first, but I have carefully examined it from without. The windows are closely barred, and spiders have built webs across them. The doors are nailed fast on the outside, and the seals that mark the warehouse as deserted have never been broken or disturbed in any way." "They tunneled up from beneath," I answered. "The Temple of Dreams is directly connected with the warehouse." "I have traversed the alley between the two buildings," said Gordon, "and the doors of the warehouse opening into that alley are, as I have said, nailed shut from without, just as the owners left them. There is apparently no rear exit of any kind from the Temple of Dreams." A tunnel connects the buildings, with one door in the rear room of Yan Chateau's and the other in the idle room of the warehouse. I have been in Yan Chateau's back room and found no such door. The table rests upon it. You noted the heavy table in the center of the room. Had you turned it around, the secret door would have opened in the floor. Now, this is my plan. I will go in through the Temple of Dreams and meet the master in the idle room. You will have men secretly stationed in front of the warehouse and others upon the street, in front of the Temple of Dreams. Yan Chateau's building, as you know, faces the waterfront, while the warehouse, fronting the opposite direction, faces a narrow street running parallel with the river. At the signal, let the men in this street break open the front of the warehouse and rush in, while simultaneously those in front of Yan Chateau's make an invasion through the Temple of Dreams. Let these make for the rear room, shooting without mercy any who may seek to deter them, and there open the secret door, as I have said, there being, to the best of my knowledge, no other exit from the master's lair. He and his servants will necessarily seek to make their escape through the tunnel. Thus, we will have them on both sides. Gordon ruminated while I studied his face with breathless interest. This may be a snare, he muttered, or an attempt to draw me away from Sir Haldred, but... I held my breath. I am a gambler by nature, he said slowly. I am going to follow what you Americans call a hunch, but God help you if you are lying to me. I sprang erect. Thank God! Now aid me with this suit, for I must be wearing it when I return to the automobile waiting for me. His eyes narrowed as I shook out the horrible masquerade and prepared to don it. This shows, as always, the touch of the master hand. You were doubtless instructed to leave marks of your hands encased in those hideous gauntlets. Yes, though I have no idea why. I think I have. The master is famed for leaving no real clues to mark his crimes. A great ape escaped from a neighboring zoo earlier in the evening, and it seems too obvious for mere chance in the light of this disguise. The ape would have gotten the blame of Sir Haldred's death. The thing was easily gotten into, and the illusion of reality it created was so perfect as to draw a shudder from me as I viewed myself in a mirror. It is now 2:00, said Gordon, allowing for the time it will take you to get back to Limehouse, and the time it will take me to get my men stationed. I promise you that at 4:30 the house will be closely surrounded. Give me a start. Wait here until I have left this house, so I will arrive at least as soon as you. Good. I impulsively grasped his hand. There will doubtless be a girl there, who is in no way implicated with the master's evil doings, but only a victim of circumstance such as I have been. Deal gently with her. It shall be done. What signal shall I look for? I have no way of signaling for you, and I doubt if any sound in the house could be heard on the street. Let your men make their raid on the stroke of 5. I turned to go. A man is waiting for you with the car, I take it. Is he likely to suspect anything? I have a way of finding out, and if he does, I replied grimly, I will return alone to the Temple of Dreams. Chapter 11. 4:34. Doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. Poe. The door closed softly behind me, the great dark house looming up more starkly than ever. Stooping, I crossed the wet lawn at a run, a grotesque and unholy figure, I doubt not, since any man had at a glance sworn me to be not a man, but a giant ape. So craftily had the master devised. I clambered down the wall, dropped to the earth beyond, and made my way through the darkness and the drizzle to the group of trees which masked the automobile. The Negro driver leaned out of the front seat. I was breathing hard and sought in various ways to simulate the actions of a man who had just murdered in cold blood and fled the scene of his crime. "You heard nothing? No sound, no scream?" I hissed, gripping his arm. "No noise, except a slight crash when you first went in," he answered. "You did a good job. Nobody passing along the road could have suspected anything." "Have you remained in the car all the time?" I asked, and when he replied that he had, I seized his ankle and ran my hands over the soles of his shoe. It was perfectly dry, as was the cuff of his trouser leg. Satisfied, I climbed into the back seat. Had he taken a step on the earth, shoe and garment would have showed it by the telltale dampness. I ordered him to refrain from starting the engine until I had removed the ape skin, and then we sped through the night, and I fell victim to doubts and uncertainties. Why should Gordon put any trust in the word of a stranger and a former ally of the master's? Would he not put my tale down as the ravings of a dope-crazed addict, or a lie to ensnare or befool him? Still, if he had not believed me, why had he let me go? I could but trust, at any rate, what Gordon did or did not do would scarcely affect my fortunes ultimately, even though Zuleika had furnished me with that which would merely extend the number of my days. My thought centered on her, and more than my hopes of vengeance on Cthulhus was the hope that Gordon might be able to save her from the clutches of the fiend. At any rate, I thought grimly, if Gordon failed me, I still had my hands, and if I might lay them upon the bony frame of the skull-faced one. Abruptly, I found myself thinking of Yusuf Ali and his strange words, the import of which just occurred to me. "The master has promised her to me in the days of the Empire." The days of the Empire? What could that mean? The automobile at last drew up in front of the building which hid the Temple of Silence, now dark and still. The ride had seemed interminable, and as I dismounted, I glanced at the timepiece on the dashboard of the car. My heart leapt. It was 4:34, and unless my eyes tricked me, I saw a movement in the shadows across the street, out of the flare of the street lamp. At this time of night, it could mean only one of two things. Some menial of the master watched for my return, or else Gordon had kept his word. The Negro drove away, and I opened the door, crossed the deserted bar, and entered the opium room. The bunks and the floor were littered with the dreamers, for such places as these know nothing of day or night, as normal people know, but all lay deep in sottish slumber. The lamps glimmered through the smoke, and a silence hung mist-like over all. Chapter 12. The Stroke of 5. He saw gigantic tracks of death, and many a shape of doom. Chesterton. Two of the China boys squatted among the smudge fires, staring at me unwinkingly as I threaded my way among the recumbent bodies and made my way to the rear door. For the first time, I traversed the corridor alone and found time to wonder again as to the contents of the strange chests which lined the walls. 4 raps on the underside of the floor, and a moment later I stood in the idol room. I gasped in amazement. The fact that across a table from me sat Cthulhus, in all his horror, was not the cause of my exclamation. Except for the table, the chair on which the skull-faced one sat, and the altar, now bare of incense, the room was perfectly bare. Drab, unlovely walls of the unused warehouse met my gaze instead of the costly tapestries I had become accustomed to. The palms, the idol, the lacquered screen, all were gone. "Ah, Mr. Costigan, you wonder, no doubt." The dead voice of the master broke in on my thoughts. His serpent eyes glittered balefully. The long yellow fingers twined sinuously upon the table. "You thought me to be a trusting fool, no doubt," he rapped suddenly. "Did you think I would not have you followed? You fool! Yusuf Ali was at your heels every moment." An instant I stood, speechless, frozen by the crash of these words against my brain. Then, as their import sank home, I launched myself forward with a roar. At the same instant, before my clutching fingers could close on the mocking horror on the other side of the table, men rushed from every side. I whirled, and with the clarity of hate, from the swirl of savage faces, I singled out Yusuf Ali and crashed my right fist against his temple with every ounce of my strength. Even as he dropped, Hassim struck me to the knees, and a Chinaman flung a man net over my shoulders. I heaved erect, bursting the stout cords as if they were strings, and then a blackjack in the hands of Ganra Singh stretched me stunned and bleeding on the floor. Lean, sinewy hands seized and bound me with cords that cut cruelly into my flesh. Emerging from the mists of semi-consciousness, I found myself lying on the altar with the masked Cathulos towering over me like a gaunt ivory tower. About, in a semicircle, stood Ganra Singh, Ya Khan, Yun Shatu, and several others whom I knew as frequenters of the Temple of Dreams. Beyond them, and the sight cut me to the heart, I saw Zuleika crouched in a doorway, her face white and her hand pressed against her cheeks in an attitude of abject terror. "I did not trust you," said Cathulos sibilantly, "so I sent Yusuf Ali to follow you. He reached the group of trees before you, and following you into the estate, heard your very interesting conversation with John Gordon, for he scaled the house wall like a cat and clung to the window ledge. Your driver delayed purposefully as to give Yusuf Ali plenty of time to get back. I had decided to change my abode anyway. My furnishings are already on their way to another house, and as soon as we have disposed of the traitor, we shall depart also, leaving a little surprise for your friend Gordon when he arrives at 5:30. My heart suddenly gave a leap of hope. Yusuf Ali had misunderstood, and Cathulos lingered here in false security while the London detective force had already silently surrounded the house. Over my shoulder, I saw Zuleika vanish from the door. I eyed Cathulos, absolutely unaware of what he was saying. It was not long until 5. If he dallied longer, then I froze as the Egyptian spoke a word, and Li Kung, a gaunt, cadaverous Chinaman, stepped from the silent semicircle and drew from his sleeve a long, thin dagger. My eyes sought the timepiece that still rested on the table, and my heart sank. It was still 10 minutes until 5. My death did not matter so much, since it simply hastened the inevitable, but in my mind's eye, I could see Cathulos and his murderers escaping while the police awaited the stroke of 5. The skull-face halted in some harangue and stood in a listening attitude. I believe his uncanny intuition warned him of danger. He spoke in a quick staccato command to Li Kung, and the Chinaman sprang forward, dagger lifted above my breast. The air was suddenly supercharged with dynamic tension. The keen dagger point hovered high above me. Loud and clear sounded the skirl of a police whistle, and on the heels of the sound, there came a terrific crash from the front of the warehouse. Cathulos leapt into frenzied activity. Hissing orders like a cat spitting, he sprang for the hidden door, and the rest followed him. Things happened with the speed of a nightmare. Li Kung had followed the rest, but Cathulos flung a command over his shoulder, and the Chinaman turned back and came rushing toward the altar where I lay, dagger high, desperation in his countenance. A scream broke through the clamor, and as I twisted desperately about to avoid the descending dagger, I caught a glimpse of Cathulos dragging Zuleika away. Then, with a frenzied wrench, I toppled from the altar, just as Li Kung's dagger, grazing my breast, sank inches deep into the dark-stained surface and quivered there. I had fallen on the side next to the wall, and what was taking place in the room I could not see, but it seemed as if, far away, I could hear men screaming faintly and hideously. Then Li Kung wrenched his blade free and sprang tigerishly around the end of the altar. Simultaneously, a revolver cracked from the doorway. The Chinaman spun clear around, the dagger flying from his hand. He slumped to the floor. Gordon came running from the doorway, where a few moments earlier Zuleika had stood, his pistol still smoking in his hand. At his heels were 3 rangy, clear-cut men in plain clothes. He cut my bonds and dragged me upright. "Quick! Where have they gone?" The room was empty of life, save for myself, Gordon, and his men, though 2 dead men lay on the floor. I found the secret door, and after a few seconds' search, located the lever which opened it. Revolvers drawn, the men grouped about me and peered nervously into the dark stairway. Not a sound came up from the total darkness. "This is uncanny," muttered Gordon. "I suppose the master and his servants went this way when they left the building, as they are certainly not here now, and Leary and his men should have stopped them either at the tunnel itself or in the rear room of Yan Chateau's. At any rate, in either event, they should have communicated with us by this time." "Look out, sir!" one of the men exclaimed suddenly, and Gordon, with an ejaculation, struck out with his pistol barrel and crushed the life from a huge snake which had crawled silently up the steps from the blackness below. "Let us see into this matter," he said, straightening. But before he could step onto the first stair, I halted him, for, flesh crawling, I began dimly to understand something of what had happened. I began to understand the silence in the tunnel, the absence of the detectives, the screams I had heard some minutes previously while I lay on the altar. Examining the lever which opened the door, I found another, smaller lever. I began to believe I knew what those mysterious chests in the tunnel contained. "Gordon," I said hoarsely, "have you an electric torch?" One of the men produced a large one. "Direct the light into the tunnel, but as you value your life, do not put a foot upon the steps." The beam of light struck through the shadows, lighting the tunnel, etching out boldly a scene that will haunt my brain all the rest of my life. On the floor of the tunnel, between the chests, which now gaped open, lay 2 men who were members of London's finest Secret Service. Limbs twisted and faces horribly distorted, they lay, and above and about them writhed, in long, glittering, scaly shimmers, scores of hideous reptiles. The clock struck 5.